We are going to start with the bail being denied in the Combs case. Joining me now is Chris Melcher, a celebrity lawyer and former sex crimes defense attorney. Thank you for joining us. So many moving parts here today. We know prosecutors argued that there was no legal basis for Combs to be granted bail, while his defense had argued that Combs had demonstrated model behavior while in detention during the trial. So ultimately, why do you think Combs didn't make bail?
Well, Meg, the judge denied bail or release pending his sentencing because he was found guilty of two serious crimes. And so generally speaking, when that happens, the person is remanded to custody and is held pending sentencing. There were some unusual circumstances here because he had already served pretrial detention since September, and he was acquitted of these much more serious crimes, and he was offering a bond and other conditions. So it seemed like he could have the opportunity to walk out that door, but that's not going to happen so quickly.
So, Chris, we know the sentencing was scheduled for October 3rd, and there's a status update on July 9th. He will be in custody until sentencing. Could Combs' legal team appeal his guilty charges? If so, what would that process look like?
Well, yes, I would anticipate he'll appeal. Usually that's going to happen after his sentence is rendered in October. And he could try to go to the Court of Appeal beforehand and say that he should be released pending that sentencing. But I don't think the Court of Appeal will interfere with the judge's really broad discretion on how to treat a defendant who's been found guilty.
All of the legal experts today have been calling this a big win for the defense. Why do you think the prosecution couldn't convince the jury on those more serious charges?
Well, Meg, the RICO charge was really complicated, and it never really seemed to fit the behavior that we saw here in this case. The RICO charges are usually for the mafia or a cartel, some kind of organized crime ring. And here, this was one guy alleged of doing some really depraved and horrible things for his own gratification. Yes, there were other people that he used to assist him, but those folks work for him and sometimes were even abused by him. So this was more of an enterprise by one person. It really didn't fit. And it looked like a little bit of an overcharge, actually, on what he was actually doing. And the jury just couldn't come to a consensus on these bigger charges, and really as a compromise, it appears, agreed to the transportation for prostitution charges that they could all find a unanimous verdict on this morning.
And we know that both of those charges carry up to 10 years each in prison. What kind of sentencing do you think Combs will ultimately receive?
Well, there's no minimum sentence for that charge. It's a maximum of 10 years. There's guidelines under federal law. They're arguing over whether that could be 2 years or 5 years in prison. He will have served over a year in detention by the time his sentencing happens, and he'll get credit for that time. He also has no criminal history that we're aware of, so there's no prior convictions. And so this might indicate a lower sentence, and after he gets credit for the time that he served, he maybe could do no time, or maybe 1 or 2 years is potentially in play.
And is it possible during that status update on July 9th that the defense team could argue to move that sentencing up?
Yeah, absolutely. They already made that play and saying, we want this done earlier. And the judge said, well, this is going to take time. There's reports that need to be done. The court will look at aggravating and mitigating factors on what sentence to issue. They're also going to look at the victim impact statements here. And the court said, we're going to take our time doing that. Of course, Diddy wants to get out of custody earlier, but, yes, I imagine he's going to renew that plea to accelerate this process. Why wait 3 months to develop that information?
I'm curious what your reaction was this morning when the jury came back after only about an hour of deliberating and was able to deliver a verdict. Yesterday, we heard that they could not reach a unanimous verdict. What do you think changed?
Well, Meg, these people invested 7 weeks of their lives into this, and I believe they wanted to reach a verdict. And so they were really opposed, it seemed like yesterday, and couldn't come to consensus. They slept on it and must have just realized, hey, there's one thing we can agree on, that's the transportation. The other charges we can't agree on. And instead of having that a deadlocked or hung jury on those other charges, they just said, hey, we're going to acquit him on that. And that's the magic or mystery that happens in juries. It's unpredictable, but at least they were able to come to an agreement, all 12 of the jurors.
All right, Chris Melcher, thank you so much. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
CBS News legal reporter Katrina Kaufman has been covering the trial. She is outside now. Katrina, thank you for joining us. First of all, just why did the judge deny bail for the music mogul?
The judge says that he agrees with the government that Sean Combs should remain in detention. The thing that he really talked about the most was the issue of violence, that Sean Combs' own defense team multiple times during this trial, including during closing arguments, admitted to domestic violence, that he has this violent temper. And as a result, they do think that he poses a safety risk. And this is one of the requirements. There's also an exception for extraordinary circumstances, but the judge said that the personal circumstances that Sean Combs listed as reasons that he needed to be out just don't rise to that level. But I think the real crux of this is that so many times during this case, his team admitted that the domestic violence existed. They didn't try to refute that. And there is this risk of safety threat.
Katrina, you were in the courtroom today. Paint a picture for us. What was Combs' demeanor like first after the verdict and then hearing his bail was denied?
I mean, there is such a contrast today. Earlier, Combs was absolutely joyous about this verdict. He was acquitted on the most significant charges against him. So in many ways, this is a victory for him, absolutely. But he did seem much more worried after he heard that he wasn't going to be getting bail. He sat there looking very serious, passing notes to his attorney. At one point, he actually raised his hand, and his lawyer for a moment indicated that Combs wanted to say something, so we thought he might speak in court. He ultimately decided not to. But there was a moment after court. He turned to his family. He told them, we'll make it through this. Stay in the light. And he said that he'll see them all when he gets out. He said that twice. And then his attorney, Mark Agnifilo, went over to the family and really gave them a pep talk. There were 2 rows full of his children, his family, his supporters, even Fahim, his security guard, who was named as a co-conspirator in the racketeering conspiracy. And what Mark Agnifilo told them is that today was a great day, that it is extremely rare. In fact, this is the first time ever that the Southern District of New York has lost a racketeering case, he said, and that Sean Combs really beat this by showing up, facing this like a man, not being afraid, and that he's going to ultimately get his life back. So despite the fact that Sean Combs is not walking free tonight, he still says this is absolutely a victory for him and for his family.
All right, Katrina Kaufman, thank you so much for all your thorough reporting and for all those interesting details inside the courtroom.